Chapter 1. Beyond the Slum. In a forgotten slum, somewhere in an Eastern European country, in a small, dirty and cold house, Zarica was born. Raised among thieves, with no other life lesson than the art of stealing, Zarica had learned from her parents and siblings how to use her quick fingers and sharp mind to survive in the harsh winters. Without enough firewood, she had learned that only the most cunning live well.20. Zarica no longer wanted to live in the poverty of the slum. She had seen enough: drunk men, tired women, hungry children and broken dreams. Although her entire life had been shaped by the silent rules of theft, Zarica felt that she did not belong there. She was ambitious, and the misery around her could no longer hold her back. One night, without telling anyone, she collected all the money she had made from the thefts and bought a plane ticket to Paris. She was determined to leave alone, to break away from the past and try her luck in a new country. France was the land of her dreams, the place where the wealth and naivety of tourists could fill her pockets. Arriving in Paris, Zarica felt that the world was opening up to her. The lit streets, the shiny shop windows, the hurried tourists, it was a place where every second brought an opportunity. She started with empty pockets, but with her eyes wide open, and the metro, in the markets, on the Champs-Élysées, her small, quick fingers slipped wallets, watches, jewelry, without anyone noticing. But Paris was not like her slum. Here, thieves they were hunted, and the law did not forgive. One day, when she was trying her luck in a luxury store, a guard noticed her. She ran away, but the city was not made for those who live in the shadows. The police caught her on a street corner, and Zarica understood then. That freedom has a price. Locked in a cold cell, without the brightness of her dreams, she remembered her home in the slum, the winters without wood, her brothers, her mother and father. For the first time, she felt longing. But could longing change a destiny written from birth? The days spent in detention were hard. Without support, without friends, Zarica had to adapt quickly. She met other prisoners, each with their own story of how the law caught up with them. But not all of them were thieves like her. Some women were there for mistakes made out of desperation, others because they had been betrayed. Zarica listened, learned and thought. When the sentence came, Zarica was deported back to a country that no longer felt like hers. She got off the plane with the same clothes she had left with, but with a changed soul. The slum was waiting for her, but now she no longer wanted to live by stealing. She wanted more, she really wanted to escape. It was hard to find her way. Without education, without papers, without anyone to lend her a helping hand, she had to fight for every step. But she fought. Enrolled in a rehabilitation center, learned to read better, to write, to think differently. She gave up stealing, she used her sharp mind for something else, to build a life that no one could take from her. Years later, when she looked in the mirror, she no longer saw the thief of her past. She saw a woman who pushed aside misery and chose to fight for a different destiny. Zarica had not stolen for a long time, but this time she was stealing something more important: the chance at a new life. Zarica knew that the path to a new life would not be easy. The slum awaited her with the same poverty, the same tired faces and the same unspoken rules. When she stepped into the narrow alleys again, she felt the gazes of her old acquaintances, some mocking, others curious, but none welcoming. No one returns from a Parisian prison to become an honest man, that was the law of the place. But Zarica was no longer. She found a place in a women's shelter, where she received a bed, a warm meal, and a chance to learn something new. She began working with her hands, not to steal, but to create. An old woman from the center, Aunt Olga, taught her how to sew. First, Zarica viewed the threads, needles and patterns as obstacles, but she remembered how her fingers moved quickly and precisely in the Paris metro. She used the same skill to sew clothes, to match fabrics, and to add fine details. Then she learned to read better. She did this with a younger girl from the center, Maria, who dreamed of becoming a teacher. Zarica found herself fascinated by new worlds, by stories of people who, like her, had fallen but risen again. But change does not come without trials. The slum kept calling her back. An old friend, Alinka, offered her a deal: goodbye. A small, simple robbery, something easy. Come on, Zarica, I know your hands haven't forgotten. What, do you want to starve to death? For the first time, Zarica refused. It wasn't easy for her. Doubt bit her every night. It would have been easier to return to her old life. But she didn't want to run away anymore, to sleep with the fear that someone would catch her again. After months of work and giving up, Zarica got a small job in a tailor's shop. She sewed on buttons, adjusted hems, but it didn't matter. She had a salary. However small, it had a beginning. Years passed, and Zarica became more than just a seamstress. She became a woman with a dream. She saved money and, with Maria's help, obtained a permit for her own small workshop. She bought a second-hand sewing machine and began creating simple dresses for the women in the neighborhood. And one day, an elegant young woman from the city entered the workshop. She wanted something unique, something handmade. Zarica sewed for her the most beautiful dress she had ever made. That client came back, and then another. And another. A few years later, Zarica's name was known in the city. She was no longer the girl who stole in Paris. She was a woman who had created something out of nothing. And when she looked in the mirror again, she smiled. This time, she was no longer stealing anything. She had earned her living fairly. Years had passed, and Zarica was no longer the girl from the slum who lived from pocket money and stealthy footsteps. Her workshop, although small, had become a respected place in the neighborhood, and people came to her not only for clothes, but also for advice. One day, as she was sorting through scraps of fabric, the door opened and a woman entered with a child in her arms. Zarica recognized her immediately. It was Alinka, her friend from the past, the one who had called her back to steal. But now she was no longer the confident girl who always grinned defiantly. She was thin, drawn, and her clothes were old and shabby. "I didn't know where else to go," Alinka said, without looking up. Her son, about 5 years old, was clutching a piece of dry bread in his fist. Zarica felt a knot in her stomach. If she had made different choices, if she had given in when it was hard, she could have been in Alinka's place now. She didn't tell her anything about the past. She didn't remind her of the night Alinka had invited her to steal and she had refused. Instead, she handed her a cup of tea. "Stay here, I'll teach you to sew." And the weeks that followed, Alinka learned the trade, just as Zarica had once learned. Tea was a hard transition, but her hands, used to stealing, adapted to creating. And slowly, she began to earn an honest living. But Zarica's story did not stop there. Once her workshop started doing well, she remembered the children of the slum. Those who, like her once, were growing up without hope. She used the money she saved and opened a small center where young girls could learn tailoring, where they were offered a hot meal and a chance. First, the people in the neighborhood were skeptical. Thieves don't change, some said. But time proved them wrong. The girls who passed through her center found jobs, changed their lives, just like she had. And one day, at the official inauguration of the center, someone Zarica would never have believed would be there slipped into the crowd. Her mother. "You've changed, Zarica," the woman said in a trembling voice. "Yes, mother," she answered. "But I'm still the same." And for the first time in many years, Zarica felt at home. Not in the slum where she had been born, not in Paris where she had dreamed of easy riches, but in the place she had built with her own hands, place where, finally, she was free. Years passed, and Zarica's name began to be known not only in the slum, but also beyond it. Girls who had learned tailoring in her workshop found work or opened their own small workshops. People who had once looked at her with suspicion now respected her work. But Zarica knew that her journey was not over. On a cold winter morning, when snowflakes were gently settling on the dusty streets of the neighborhood, she received an unexpected visitor. On the threshold of her workshop stood an elegantly dressed man with a black leather briefcase. "Mrs. Zarica?" he asked, looking at her with interest. "That's what they tell me," she answered, curious. "My name is Victor Marinescu. I represent an organization that helps disadvantaged women find their way in life. I heard about your center and we think we can collaborate." Zarica looked at him carefully. In his eyes there was neither contempt nor pity, but only respect. It was the first time that someone from the big world had extended a hand to her without expecting anything in return. "And what do you want from me?" "Nothing other than doing what you're already doing. But on a larger scale, we want to support you in opening a bigger workshop, where you can welcome more girls, to offer them not just a job, but a future." For the first time, Zarica felt overwhelmed. She, the girl from the slums, the thief who had fled to Paris with her pockets full of dreams and fear, was now getting the chance to change lives, just as she had changed hers. She accepted. With the support of the organization, the new center was opened in the heart of the city, far from the slums, but not far enough to forget where she had come from. There, the girls learned not only tailoring, but also how to manage their money, how to find a job, how to stop being victims of poverty. One evening, when she was left alone in the workshop, Zarica picked up an old pair of scissors, one of the first she had ever used. The rusty handle still bore traces of her past. But now, instead of stealing, those same hands were building. She smiled. She was no longer the girl who had run away from home. She was no longer the prisoner of a destiny written before birth. She was free. And perhaps, for the first time in her life, she felt that she was no longer alone. Years passed, and Zarica's name became a symbol of change. Her workshop was no longer just a place where girls learned to sew, but a true rehabilitation center, where women from all corners of the city came to rebuild their lives. With the support of Victor Marinescu's organization and her tireless work, she managed to open 2 more workshops in marginal neighborhoods. But Zarica knew that her path did not stop there. With each woman who managed to find a purpose, she felt that she could do more. One day, after a meeting with Victor, she dared to propose something new to him. "Victor, I want to open a place where the children here can learn more than how to survive, a place where they can dream." "An educational center?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes. Not just tailoring or crafts, we want to give them more, to help them learn to read, to have access to books, to real lessons." Victor smiled. He knew that Zarica was not the kind of woman who would give up easily, so they started working on the new project. With funds raised from donations and support from local authorities, after 2 years, Zarica's dream became a reality. The My Chance Center opened in a former abandoned factory, carefully transformed into a colorful place, with classrooms, a library and a yard where children could play safely. Teachers came as volunteers, and the women from her former workshops helped in any way they could, either by preparing meals for the children or teaching them practical things. One evening, while looking at the yard full of children running around laughing, Zarica remembered her own childhood, of the hard winters, of cold, hunger, constant fear of being caught. But now, the children in the slum had a chance that she had never had. A little boy approached her and handed her a drawing. "Look, I made this for you." Zarica took the sheet and saw a drawing of a woman holding several children's hands. Above, written in clumsy letters, were only 2 words. "Thank you, Zarica." Her eyes filled with tears. She was no longer the girl who stole to survive. Now, she was the woman who gave others a chance at a better life. On a cold autumn morning, Zarica was in the workshop, checking the new materials brought by the seamstresses, when the phone rang. It was not a familiar number. She hesitated for a moment, then answered. "Hello." A feminine voice, with an unmistakable accent, rang out clearly on the receiver. "Bonjour, Madame Zarica. I am Claire Fontaine, the director of the Maison Fontaine fashion house in Paris. I hope I am not disturbing you." Zarica stopped suddenly. The name Claire Fontaine was well known to her. When she lived in Paris, her name was on all the billboards, and the windows of luxury stores displayed her extravagant creations. She was one of the most famous fashion designers in France. She felt her heart beating fast, but her voice remained calm. In the few years since she had returned, she had learned French very well. She had spoken it daily with Victor, with her partners in ONG, and now her accent had become almost impeccable. "Bonjour, Madame Fontaine," she answered, with a certainty that surprised even herself. "How can I help you? I have heard wonderful things about your work. The workshop you have built and the women you have helped are a true inspiration. I will be in your country next week, and I would like to visit the workshop. Do you think it would be possible?" Zarica hid her excitement. A woman of Claire Fontaine's stature wanted to see her workshop? "Of course," she replied, keeping her composure. "It would be an honor to receive you." "Merveilleuse. Then I will see you next Thursday. A wonderful day, Madame Zarica." The phone hung up, and Zarica remained motionless for a few seconds. She looked at the seamstresses working, at the girls learning to sew carefully, at everything she had built. Now, a woman she had admired from the shadows, during the difficult years in Paris, was coming to see her. She was no longer a simple thief who stole on the subway. Chapter 2. Paris, the City of Destiny. Now Paris was coming to her, and in the days that followed, Zarica had no time to let her emotions overwhelm her. The workshop had to be impeccable for Claire Fontaine's visit. She organized every detail. The work tables were carefully arranged, the materials were elegantly displayed, and the women who worked there were instructed to present their work with pride. But, above all, Zarica prepared herself. She chose to wear a simple but elegant dress, sewn right in her workshop, and tied her hair in a loose bun. She wanted to be exactly what she was, a woman who had managed to change her destiny. On Thursday morning, a black car stopped in front of the workshop. Claire Fontaine got out of it, an imposing woman with perfectly styled silver hair and large sunglasses. She wore a long cashmere coat and high-heeled shoes which echoed softly on the sidewalk. "Bonjour, Madame Zarica," she said, smiling warmly. "Bonjour, Madame Fontaine. Welcome." Zarica held out her hand, and Claire shook it firmly. Then, without hesitation, the fashion designer took off her glasses and looked around. "Extraordinary," she whispered, her gaze sweeping over the work tables, the hand-embroidered fabrics, the girls who carefully worked on every detail. Zarica began to explain how the workshop was born, how the women she hired came from difficult backgrounds, just like her, and how each stitch in the exposed materials told a story. Claire Fontaine listened attentively, sometimes touching the fabrics with her fingertips, analyzing the fine details of the stitches. Finally, she turned to Zarica and said, "What you do here is remarkable. The fashion world needs stories like yours. I wonder, would you consider collaborating with Maison Fontaine?" Zarica was speechless for a moment. Claire Fontaine, the woman who seemed like a myth on the billboards in Paris, was offering her a collaboration? "It would be an honor," Zarica said, feeling that a new chapter in her life was just beginning. Claire Fontaine smiled and took a business card out of her purse. "I'll send you all the details next week. I think we can do great things together." The luxury car pulled away from the workshop. Zarica stood in the doorway, holding the business card that once would have been just a trophy stolen from the Champs-Élysées. But now there was a key to the future she had always dreamed of, and the weeks that followed, Zarica worked non-stop. The collaboration with Maison Fontaine was not just a chance, but a test. Claire Fontaine was famous for her high standards, and failure was not an option. Late one evening, when all the women in the workshop had left, Zarica was left alone, working on the sketches she was about to present. Her hands glided over the fine materials, and each stitch was made with precision. She had learned so much, but above all, she had learned that success does not come easily. In the appointed morning, she boarded a train to Paris, taking her creations with her. When she arrived at the Maison Fontaine headquarters, an imposing workshop in an elegant neighborhood, Zarica felt her heart beat faster. "Stay calm," she told herself. She was led into a showroom, where Claire Fontaine was waiting for her with her team. On the table were samples of the materials Zarica had chosen, and the sketches were already spread out on a board. "Impressive," Claire said, touching a hand-embroidered dress with her fingertips. "Tell me, Zarica, what inspired you?" "The story of each woman who sewed these models. Each stitch is a struggle, a dream, a new beginning," Zarica answered, feeling like she was speaking from the heart. Claire Fontaine smiled and turned to her team. "I think I just discovered something special. Maison Fontaine wants to launch an exclusive line with these creations. And I want you, Zarica, to lead this project." Zarica's eyes widened in amazement. "Me? To lead the project?" "Yes. You have talent, but above all, you have a story. And fashion needs stories." Zarica would never have imagined that a day like this would be possible. She had left the slums like a thief, had found her way into a foreign world, and now, right in the heart of Paris, someone was offering her a real chance. With her heart full of emotion, she looked up and said, "I accept." And so, Zarica stepped into a world she had never imagined for herself. But this time, it was no longer a shadow stealing. She was a woman who had earned her place through work, passion, and determination. The plane landed smoothly on the runway of Henri Coanda Airport. Zarica watched out the window as the sun set over the city that, no matter how much she tried to leave behind, was still part of her. She had not expected any special welcome, but when she passed through the gates of arrivals, the lights of the cameras blinded her for a moment. Journalists crowded around her, and microphones were stretched towards her face. "Zarica, how is it to return home as a successful woman? How did you go from a child stealing on the streets of Paris to a collaboration with Maison Fontaine? What's next for you?" Zarica pushed her hair back and smiled. She hadn't expected to become a media topic, but she was ready. "I'm coming back with a chance, but not just for me, but for all the women who grew up like me. The slum will no longer be a place for thieves. It will be a place where girls learn, work and dream." From a corner of the terminal, a familiar figure looked at her with a proud smile. Victor Marinescu, her friend and associate, had been the one who had arranged this entire meeting. "You have surprises for me," Zarica said when she reached him. Just the beginning, Victor replied. We have an interview tomorrow. I want the world to hear your story. The next day, Zarica went to the television headquarters with Alinka, her childhood friend. The two women were no longer the same little girls who ran through the streets of the slum, but their past was part of the story. Tell us, Zarica, you left a world where theft was the only way to survive. What made you change everything? I'm tired of living hidden. I wanted more. But not just for myself. If a girl like me can succeed, then everyone can. And what has changed in the slum? Alinka intervened, laughing. Everything has changed. The gypsy girls of the past no longer steal, now they go to school. The older ones work, learn trades. And in a month, those who started the program 10 years ago will go with Zarica to Paris. The journalist raises an eyebrow, surprised. So you're not going alone? No, we're leaving together. Paris offered me a chance, and I'm passing it on. The interview ended with applause, and Zarica felt, for the first time in her life, that the change she had dreamed of was not just a dream, it was reality. In a month, a new stage would begin, not just for her, but for all the women who had grown up like her. The slum was no longer just a place of survival, it was a place of rebirth. The last month in Bucharest was organized chaos. Zarica was caught between interviews, meetings, and organizing the departure for the girls from the slum who were to accompany her to Paris. Chapter 3. The Return and the Revolution in the Neighborhood. The Maison Fontaine fashion studio awaited them, but until then, they still had a lot to work out. Zarica wanted each girl to be prepared. Together with Victor Marinescu, she found teachers to help them improve their French, and several local studios agreed to offer them intensive tailoring courses. I don't want us to end up there and be just helpers. They need to know that we have talent and that we deserve this chance, Zarica would tell the girls. Alinka would sometimes laugh, seeing how much her friend was getting agitated. You've become a real teacher, Zari. Who would have believed it? If we don't help each other, who will? Zarica answered, shrugging her shoulders. In the evening, when all the preparations stopped for a few hours, Zarica allowed herself to dream. She would close her eyes and imagine the future. What it would be like when she first entered the studio, what it would be like to see her sketches transformed into real dresses, what it would be like to see her first name on a designer label. But most of all, she was waiting for the day when she would return to the slum, not as a girl who had fled poverty, but as a woman who had demonstrated that the past does not decide your future. The airport was full of emotion. The girls from the slum, all elegantly dressed, but with wide and curious eyes, were clutching their plane tickets in their hands. It was their first trip by plane, the first time they had gone so far. Are you ready? Zarica asked them, smiling. More ready than ever. One of them answered. Victor Marinescu, who had come to drive them to the airport, looked at Zarica with pride. You did it, he told her softly. Not yet, she answered, her eyes shining. But we are on our way. When the plane took off for Paris, Zarica realized that everything she had dreamed of for years was coming true. And this was just the beginning. Zarica and the girls from Mahala arrived in Paris on a cool spring morning, with the sun barely emerging from behind the clouds. They were all overwhelmed by the beauty of the city and the hustle and bustle of the streets. But Zarica knew that they had a much greater purpose than getting lost in front of the shiny shop windows, as she had promised herself. She had no time for momentary dreams. She had to focus on their future. Welcome to Paris, Zarica told them in a calm but determined voice. Here we will learn, work, and prove that we deserve every opportunity. The girls looked at her with wide eyes, but each one felt that thrill of hope that Zarica had instilled in them all these years. They were ready to learn everything they needed to face the challenges that lay ahead. They were no longer just kids from the slum, they were women who had the chance to build a better life for themselves. In the following weeks, Zarica began to teach them everything she knew about fashion and design.At. The Maison Fontaine atelier, however, things were much more complex than she had expected. The famous designers who collaborated with the fashion house were demanding and had no patience for mistakes. But Zarica was determined. After each failure, she would get up, learn, improve herself and encourage others. In a short time, the girls from the Mahala began to assert themselves, becoming not only part of the team, but also sources of inspiration for other designers. You brought something new, one of the designers often told them. It is not easy to do something truly different, but you succeeded. One day, Zarica was called to an important meeting at Maison Fontaine. She waited with a tinge of anxiety, but also with the certainty that she was on the right track. "Zarica, I have been watching you carefully," said Mrs. Sophie Leclerc, the famous designer at the Maison. "You have managed to make a name for yourself in this workshop, and I am impressed by your skills. I want to offer you an opportunity." Zarica remained silent, wondering what this could mean. "We will organize a fashion show next month, and your dresses will be presented on the catwalk," Sophie continued. "Oh, you want to be part of this event?" Zarica looked at her, and in her eyes there was a mixture of amazement and pride. Tea was the chance she had been waiting for. They were the first dresses she had created, for women like her, from a forgotten slum, but with big dreams. "Yes, I will do everything I can to succeed," Zarica answered, determined. That was the moment when everything changed. While the girls from Mahala continued their education and work in the workshop, Zarica worked on her own creations. Each dress she put on paper seemed to come to life. She colored the fabric with her dreams and desires, and each stitch was one step closer to turning that dream into reality. To the end of the month, the fashion show took place. The dresses, worn by the models from Paris, were a resounding success. At the end of the presentation, Zarica felt more fulfilled than at any other moment in her life. Her work, the work of the girls from Mahala, had been appreciated. When she returned home, to the slum, she was no longer the girl who had left with a plane ticket, with the desire to escape poverty. She was a woman who had begun to change not only her own destiny, but also that of many others. The girls from Mahala who had started the program 10 years ago were there, in the workshop, ready to face the world with the same dreams and ambitions. They were no longer just the poor girls of the slum. Now, they were the designers of tomorrow, the women who, together with Zarica, would write a new story. And as she looked back at the familiar streets of the slum, Zarica knew that the change had only been the beginning. With each passing day, Zarica was finding more and more of her place in the world of Parisian fashion. The girls from Mahala who had come with her were now the foundation of the workshop. Many of them, who had started out shyly, quickly transformed into true artists of the trade. Every detail of their creations told a story about their struggles, about the misery they came from, but also about the hope that was ignited in each seam. Zarica no longer needed to prove her skills. The fact that she was there, next to them, and that she was carrying forward everything they had learned together spoke for itself. She was a source of inspiration, but also of motivation. Returning to Mahala was also a crucial moment. After each success in Paris, Zarica returned home, but not just to visit the places and people that had once been her family. Now, Mahala no longer meant only dirty streets and broken lives. She wanted to give those who remained a chance at a better future. One summer morning, Zarica met Alinka and the other women who had started studying at school and working. They had already seen the changes in their lives, and now they had something much more precious: education and hope. What Zarica had started years ago, with only her own hands and dreams, was now becoming a dream common. "Zarica, we need to do more," Alinka said, looking at the girls who were packing their bags to go to school in Paris. "We need to change more than just our lives. Now is the time to transform the slum into a place where children and women will no longer have to leave for a chance. I want to start a design school, to bring more girls from the slum who want to learn, but also the youngest ones." Zarica looked at her with a big smile on her face, proud of her friend's determination. This initiative would not only be a step forward for their community, but it would also be proof that big changes don't just start in Paris, but even in forgotten places. With the help of her friend, Victor Marinescu, who was already investing in their success, Zarica managed to set up a design school right in the slum. This time, it wasn't just about learning to sew, but also about she learned French, fashion history, and even elements of marketing and business. The girls who arrived there were not only learning a trade, but also preparing for a better life, a life that did not condemn them to remain in poverty. At the same time, the Paris workshop became the place where Zarica could fulfill her big dream: to create collections inspired by the traditions and culture of their Mahala, but also by the modern world. Each piece of clothing had a story, a meaning. Each dress was like a piece of craftsmanship, a symbol of their struggle. Zarica and her girls from Mahala began to be invited to various international fashion events, and at each event where they appeared with their unique dresses, they came home with an award, recognition, but above all with immense pride. Finally, their Mahala had a voice that resonated beyond the boundaries of the neighborhood. One evening, after a fashion show, Zarica stopped in front of a large mirror in her Paris studio, where she looked at her reflection. She seemed a different woman from the girl who had left years ago. She was no longer a little girl from a slum forgotten by the world. She was a symbol of change, of the power to face any obstacle, but also of the hope to create a better future, not only for herself, but also for others. And while the world continued to applaud her, Zarica knew that the real victory was not in the trophies she had won, but in those lives that, thanks to her, had a chance at a different destiny. Chapter 4. Mahala Couture. From Dream to Reality. After their resounding success in Paris, Zarica and her friend, Ilinka, knew it was time to take the next step. The international fashion world had accepted them, but their soul remained in Romania, where it all began. Together, they set up a fund to raise money and open their own fashion house in Romania. With the support of Victor Marinescu and other investors, but especially thanks to their perseverance, they managed to obtain the necessary amount. The fashion house was named Mahala Couture, a tribute to their past, but also a statement of pride for who they really were. Located in an old renovated building in the center of Bucharest, the atelier had a sophisticated air, but with a bohemian soul. The design of their collections was a perfect mix between Romanian tradition and Parisian style. Flowing skirts with golden embroidery, delicate blouses with patterns inspired by Gypsy art, and flowing dresses with floral motifs quickly became a trend. The official opening was attended by journalists, influencers and fashion critics from all over Europe. Zarica and Ilinka appeared dressed in their own creations, and the guests were enchanted by their story. "This is not just a fashion house," Zarica said, holding Ilinka's hand, "but a symbol of change. We started from the bottom, but we proved that talent and will can transform any destiny." The press dubbed the event the Mahala Elegance Revolution, and in the following days, orders began to flow in, and the months that followed, the Mahala Couture fashion house became a place where girls from their community could learn tailoring, design, and business. Those who once lived in poverty now found a place in an exclusive industry. Zarica had not forgotten where she had come from. Although she was now a successful woman, with collections presented at the biggest fashion weeks, she always returned to Mahala, visiting the school and encouraging the young women to dream further. Ilinka, always by her side, took care of the administrative side of the business, making sure that their dream continued to grow. Now, Zarica and Ilinka, they were no longer just two girls from Mahala who had been forced to steal to survive. Now they were two strong women who had changed the destiny of an entire community. After the explosive launch of Mahala Couture, success came in waves, but also with unexpected challenges, and in just a few months, their collections were on the pages of fashion magazines, and orders were coming not only from Romania, but also from the great fashion capitals. But with fame, obstacles also appeared, and the fashion world, competition was fierce, and not everyone was thrilled with their success. One morning, Ilinka stormed into Zarica's office, throwing a magazine on the desk. On the cover, a collection almost identical to their latest line had been launched by another fashion house in Paris. "They stole our ideas, Zarica. Someone in the studio sold our sketches." Zarica's heart sank. The betrayal came from within. She decided to investigate discreetly, and with the help of Victor Marinescu, they discovered that one of the hired tailors, a man named Laurent Dumont, had been paid to sell their designs to a competing fashion house. The fury was immense, but Zarica did not lose her temper. Instead of getting into a public scandal, she used the situation to her advantage. She launched an emergency collection, adapting the stolen models and adding new elements inspired by old Roman traditions. The new collection, symbolically called Renaissance, was presented at Paris Fashion Week, eclipsing the competition and consolidating their reputation. With the guaranteed success, Mahala Couture received new investments, and Zarica and Ilinka decided to open a second workshop, in the heart of Mahala, where young women from the community could learn the trade and have a better future. They also started a collaboration with major art and design universities, offering scholarships for talented girls from disadvantaged backgrounds. In an interview, Zarica was asked what her greatest achievement is. "The fact that the girls from Mahala no longer steal like we used to, but create. That the hands that once had to take what was not theirs, now sew beauty and bring it to the world." While the business was thriving, a new challenge was beginning to appear in Zarica's personal life: love. Someone from her past had reappeared, a man who had loved her before fame transformed her. But, for the first time, Zarica was no longer the girl who dreamed of a better life. Now, she was a strong, independent woman. And she knew that her story was just beginning. The success of Mahala Couture could no longer be disputed. The collections were selling like hot cakes, and the ateliers in Bucharest and Paris were full of future fashion designers, many of them girls who once would not have had any chance at a decent life. But, in the midst of this fulminating success, Zarica felt that something was missing. She is divided between two worlds, Bucharest, with the slum that made her who she is, and Paris, the city of her dreams, where could take her career to the highest heights. One evening, after a long day of work, Zarica received an unexpected message. "Can we meet? I'm in Bucharest. I'd like to talk. D." It was Damien, her first love, the boy who had loved her before fame, before money, before the world saw her as a successful woman. They had met when they were just children in the Mahala. He had been one of the few who had believed in her dreams, but their paths had parted when he had left for Spain to work. Now he was coming back. When they met, Damien looked at her for a long time, with silent pride. "You succeeded, Zarica. You don't even know how happy I am. And you? What have you been doing all these years?" Damien told her how he had worked on construction sites in Madrid, but his dream had always been to return and open a business in Romania. He wanted to create a network of workshops for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, where they could learn real trades. "Do you know that your work inspired me? If you manage to change the slum, I think I can do something good too." That moment, Zarica felt her heart tighten. She had everything in Paris: success, recognition, an enviable career. But here in Bucharest, she had her roots. The people who really mattered. Damien took her hand and said simply, "If you leave again, I don't know when I'll see you again. But if you stay, we can do something incredible together." That night, Zarica lay awake, looking over the sketches of the new collection for Paris. She knew that no matter what she chose, her life would never be the same. The decision had been hard, but inevitable. Paris had offered her a life she had never imagined, and her dream was only just beginning. She had built a name for herself, and Mahala Couture had become a respected brand in the fashion world. On the morning of her departure, Zarica sat on the edge of her bed, looking at her open suitcase, and in her hand she held an old photo of her and Alinka years ago, on the dusty streets of the slum. Innocent smiles, fragile dreams. A light knock on the door brought her back to the present. It was Victor Marinescu, her friend and associate. "Ready?" he asked, analyzing her expression. "Yes." Ready. It was the first time he had said that with certainty. No matter how much she loved Bucharest, no matter how much she wanted to change things at home, Paris was the place where her future shone. To the airport, Alinka was already waiting for her. When he saw her, he ran to her and hugged her tightly. "Don't forget about us, Zarica." "How could I?" she said, trying to smile, although tears were moistening her eyes. Damien had not come. Zarica knew that he would not be able to say goodbye. She had imagined that, perhaps, at the last moment he would appear. But he had not. With her heart divided between the past and the future, she stepped on the plane. Once in Paris, Zarica immersed herself completely in her work. She had a lot to prove. Her atelier had become one of the most sought-after places for young fashion designers, and her collections were now showing on the biggest catwalks. One evening, in her apartment overlooking the Eiffel Tower, she checked her phone. Message from Alinka flashed on the screen. "Have you gotten used to it yet? Bucharest is deserted without you." Zarica smiled bitterly. "Paris is beautiful, but my soul is divided in two," and even if she had no regrets, she knew that a part of her would always remain at home, on the streets where her dream first took shape. Zarica had quickly become accustomed to Parisian life, but something of her always remained connected to Bucharest. Although she was now a recognized fashion designer, every success came with a shadow of nostalgia. Her Paris atelier was thriving, and the women she had brought from the Mahala were working side by side with famous designers. A world she had once only dreamed of had become reality. One evening, while she was sketching a new collection, the phone rang. An unknown number from Romania appeared on the screen. "Hello. Zarica, it's Alinka." Her friend's voice seemed shaky. "What happened? You need to come home. It's about Damien." Zarica felt her breath catch. "What's wrong with him?" "He's in the hospital. He had an accident, and he called out for you." Her heart was beating wildly. Paris could wait. The slums were calling her again. Zarica didn't hesitate. She threw a few clothes into a suitcase, cancelled all her meetings in Paris, and took the first plane to Bucharest. Her thoughts raced chaotically. Damien, the boy she had grown up with on the streets of the slums, the one who had taught her how to run through the crowd, the one who had protected her when others looked down on her. He was a part of her past, but also one of the few people who had seen her before she became Zarica, the fashion designer. When she landed in Otapini, the press that had been waiting for her last time was no longer there. This time, only Alinka was waiting for her, her eyes red from crying. "Is it serious?" Zarica asked, without wasting time. "Yes. The doctors don't know if he'll fully recover. It was a motorcycle accident. He was drunk." Zarica felt a lump in her throat. Damien had always been a rebel, but she didn't think he would self-destruct like this. "I want to see him." They went straight to the hospital. When she entered the room, she was shocked. Damien was no longer the fearless boy she knew. He was thin, pale, his face lined with cuts and bruises. When he opened his eyes and saw her, he tried to smile. "You came back," he whispered. "How the hell did you get into this state, Damien?" Zarica's voice was a combination of anger and pain. "I stayed here, and Mahala swallowed me. Not all of us have your chance." His words hit her like a punch in the chest. Part of her knew he was right. He had left and succeeded, but not everyone could escape poverty. "Then I'll give you a chance." Damien laughed bitterly. "What for? To sew dresses? To work at your fashion house?" Zarica approached and looked him straight in the eye. "No, but you can get up, change. Just like I did. I won't let you die here, Damien." That moment, she knew that she hadn't just come to say goodbye. She had come to save him. Just like he had saved her once. Zarica wasn't going to let Damien bury his future under the ruins of his past. After a few days of hospitalization, she started looking for the best recovery clinic for him. Together with Alinka, she made sure that all expenses were covered. "I don't need your pity," Damien said one day, trying to hide his frustration.